Before I start off this video, I want to give a huge shout out to Ryan. He's over there somewhere. Hi. He helped push in my car, or maybe he did it all himself. But it's been staying on his property for a while, and it's finally inside now. So now we can actually work on it. First things first, we need to clean this and maybe paint the bay. But after that, we're cutting the front end off right here. The radiator is going to be mounted in part of the core support, and then the motor's going in. As far as the motor goes, I got the old pilot bearing out with chisels, and we're going to put the new one in. We're going to put on the flywheel, and we have a new clutch here. This is the new clutch from ACT. It does not have the flywheel in here because that comes with the Fish Racing bell housing, and I'm excited to get this on. Here is the new ACT clutch on the Rotary. Now, this is a 6-puck clutch. It is sprung, but it is their extreme disc instead of their normal disc. I wanted to run their normal disc, but it was out of stock and on back order for quite a long time, so I went with more of the racing spec. Along with it being more race spec, it is capable of handling higher torque. I think this one's capable of like 700, which I don't think I'll ever be pushing that much power out of this at most tracks that I'll be running at.
Are you not going to be running the bank at Blackhawk, dude?
I mean, maybe.
What about Bruce City? We're supposed to drift the outer bank.
Okay, so this car, how much power do you think that's making?
Oh, like 260 maybe.
260-ish?
Maybe.
I linked the whole track at Milwaukee Mile in this car. And that has maybe a third of the power that's gonna make.
Yeah.
So
we didn't get to the bank yet with that car.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay. So if I ever start slipping this clutch, I'm making a lot of power.
Oh yeah.
Like a lot of power.
Enough.
Yeah. Also, good news. That goes in and out without much issue. If you saw me filing down the input shaft while I was hammering it in, it kind of pushed a lip over and this was not going in. So this is basically the input shaft of our CD09 trans. This trans, actually. So back when I was doing that weird measurement with sockets, I could have just been using this just to see if this fit into the E-shaft, which it now does with the supplied throwout bearing from Fish Racing. On a stock 13B, you have a big water coolant housing right here with the pump. Well, this is an adapter plate from Chips Motorsports. This changes it to AN fittings. Now, I didn't know what size fittings to get, and there's nothing posted on the website. So I grabbed my calipers and I measured, and this is 31.4, which comes out to 16 AN or ORB. So this threads in, or it should thread in. like that on both sides. That solves the fitting issue. Now I needed a water pump. So in this box, I have my Mazir 55 gallon per minute flowing water pump. The only problem is this outlet is -20, so I got some new fittings that go from -20 ORB to 16 AN. So now all of my lines and fittings will be the same size. For the radiator, I have these weld-on 16 AN bungs. For this upper filler neck, probably going to weld it just like that, and then this bottom filler neck probably going to cut off and then mount this on just so that it's converted to AN, and then this will be mounted diagonally in a V-mount formation. I'm currently standing in the middle of the engine bay of the 240, just trying to visualize the 13B. About 2.5 inches from the firewall is where the transmission will end, and then 10 inches, 10.5 inches from there is where the front plate starts. So that is about right here on the stock subframe of a 240. Now, the reason why that's important is that I have a side mount alternator. This side mount alternator sits about 4 inches from the bottom of the alternator, flat with the pan. And the base of the rotary from this end to this end is about 12.5 inches. The lowest possible point that the motor can be is these rack bolts. And measuring from those rack bolts up, about the top of this is 4 inches. So the alternator is going to sit somewhere in this area. So we're probably not going to have any issues with making a motor mount. From the firewall out 19.5 inches is the end of this power brace. That is the front of the eccentric shaft pulley. So the motor is going to sit about here. Stock 240 sits about here. That's about 4 inches back from stock by putting the rotary in. And the width of the rotary sits between this bushing and the edge of the rack. So essentially, the whole motor sits right here. So we'll have plenty of space to put the turbo next to the strut tower in this area. Plenty of space for a downpipe, and then plenty of space for putting our coils and the alternator on the side, and then plumbing should be easy. Once I cut the front end off here and here and remove all of this mess, I'll make brackets that mount to those 2 points and come out for the arrow catches for the hood. And then we'll probably make a mount that goes from each frame rail, has a U-bar that goes across, mounts the radiator up to this point, and then we'll lay the intercooler kind of this direction, and then we can start planning bash bars. Being that the motor is going to sit so far back and that we have a vented D-Max hood, it will give us plenty of space to make ducting out of the vents for our spall fans to pull all of the heat out of the radiator. All of that is good in theory, but we need to start cutting and putting the motor actually in the engine bay to get measurements, and then we can start designing stuff and welding everything. In addition to cutting a bunch of stuff out, I need to go through all of this stock wiring, figure out what I need, what I don't need, and then once the motor is in, motor mount is in and designed, then we can start plugging in all of the sensors, all of the Haltech wiring, the ECU, and get our nice IC7 display up there. It's going to be a lot of work, but I think it's going to turn out pretty sick. Something I want to keep is this hood mount. I'll probably relocate this little clip over here and then probably cut it off there and shape this up somehow, or make some type of bracket for that. Maybe it'll mount onto the new tube structure but I do want to keep that just so that when I put my hood up, I can, you know, secure it and keep it up, because I don't want to do the Honda hood mod because I've seen a lot of people crack their windshield, and I'd much rather have just the clean look of having it. So does that mean it's time to cut? No, we need to measure. So especially when you're cutting out a main piece of the body, you want to measure from things that don't move. So maybe the edge of the chassis to the edge of the chassis. Maybe from this seam here that's not getting cut to this seam, because what might happen is that this whole section might either tilt in or out depending on where I cut it and how I cut it. So before I cut it off right here, I'm going to measure, just that way when I put my supporting bar in, it lines up how it's supposed to, keeps everything square and straight. Then we can start cutting. Here goes to show you, measure like 30 times, cut once, because this is pretty much lined up exactly where I wanted this to start. Obviously, I'll be trimming this line back just to shape it up more, probably with the angle grinder, but to get the rough cut done, that was good. Now I noticed when I was going to be cutting this side, the whole structure didn't have anything to balance on, so I grabbed some vice grips, placed them over there. I cut this section off first because my plan is to bend this part, box this in, and weld this to this box. That way then it still stays in the stock place for the hood prop. And again, this side turned out really good with where I wanted to start that cut. Kind of sad that I no longer have a clean core support, but it will make room for the radiator setup we're going with. This also makes it so that it's a lot easier to get in and out the motor because there's going to be a lot of test fitting. It's almost 11 tonight. The clip you're seeing right now versus the clip you're going to see next, there's going to be a bit of a jump, about 2 weeks, just because I have vacation, Ryan has vacation, and this thing isn't going to get worked on. So I guess we'll just flash to the future. What's up, guys? So while I was away, a bunch of stuff got cleaned, which is cool. I shaved. I look awful. Miata's getting some other parts, and the 240 is still in its same spot. So waiting on the lift to get fixed. There's a solenoid or a T. It needs a line ran to it, and that's for the safety locks. And I don't really want to work under my car and get killed by it. So waiting for that line to get fixed, or the T to get fixed. And then I can start throwing the motor into the car. Now, I'm wanting to put some stuff together first. I sat down and I made a list of all the things I need to do to get the engine, the trans, in the car, get it all wired up, everything fabbed and done and running and driving. Now, my plan is I want to have it ready to drive to Final Bout, and in order for that to happen, it needs to have a motor in it. So I made a list. I have about 66 things I want to get done. All little bits and pieces that need to come together in the next month or so. So it's gonna be a lot of stuff that needs to get done, but hopefully it can all get done. Today, just plugging away on the motor here, I'm gonna throw in the fuel rails. Now, I have two Ys. I have a -8Y and a -6Y. So the -8 will feed both of the fuel rails, then the fuel rails will come back together into the -6, and then that will go to my fuel pressure regulator. In this box, I have these 3/8 pt2-6 fittings that will go onto my fuel pressure regulator. I have a Tomei one. And then I already put the AN adapters onto here. So this is a 8 AN fuel rail that has 8 AN or B, and then 6 AN to 8 AN. And then this little guy is a 6 AN fuel rail. So I have a 6 to 6 and then an 8 to 6. So this is my primary, that's my secondary, and then I have my injector dynamics injectors. Oh. So there's a little purple bucket down there that adapts the size of the stock injectors to the size of the injector dynamics injectors. And then I put grease on everything just to make sure not to tear an O-ring, which is very important. And then deciding where to line up this injector plug. I have a pigtail here, and I want it to just be able to slip in and out without much issue. If I had this rotated more, it would hit the fitting. If I had it rotated more the other way, it would start hitting the pedestal. So I'm gonna do that with the other side and then try to fit up the top injectors. So I was looking at one of my secondary injectors, and by looking at this, these are adapters as well. These will fit in that hole about 15-ish millimeters. So this is what it looks like installed. You can see it's going up almost to this point right here. Now, with how that's installed and these risers here, with it mounted in place, there's a bit of room. These are shorter length injectors than I think this fuel rail is obviously designed for. But I do have the TIG welder in that corner, so we're going to cut these, shorten them, and make the fuel rail sit down lower, which will be a lot better for packaging for fuel lines and everything like that. So let's do it. So the distance from this ridge right here to the bottom of the fuel rail is about 29 millimeters. So I'm going to take that out of the standoff material so then we can have the fuel rail properly seated on those injectors. I got both of these brackets marked out. Time to cut on the inside of the lines, then I'll clean them up and then I'll take them together. Okay, so the secondary fuel rail is on. You can see it's much shorter. The injectors aren't pinched or anything like that. You can see the spacing on these ones are very, very close to that primary fuel rail. So trying to get connector in there is going to be a bit tricky, you know. So I'm going to have to modify 2 of these to get to fit, or maybe trim down this primary fuel rail just a little bit, maybe trim up the secondary a little bit too. But those are the 2 fuel rails on there right now. Not sure if I'm gonna throw the upper on yet until it's in the car.